Hey, how you doing, everybody? It's me, Crazyfrankie, and I'd like to welcome you to my Week 5 4 key game picks of the 2020 NFL season. Before we talk about week number 5, there's quite a bit to talk about from week number 4. Now, I don't want to get into anything, just about everything that happened in week number 4, but all I can say was obviously the big story that came out of week number 4. Obviously, some games had to have been moved up because of the current pandemic, and certain Tennessee Titan players did end up with a coronavirus. So the game between the Steelers and the Titans has been moved to week number 7 from one as of the time of this video. So far that game will be moved into week number 7. There was situations also between the Patriots and the Chiefs of possible positive players testing positive for coronavirus. But up until Sunday, there wasn't any confirmed new cases, and also they moved the game to last Monday, in which, in all hindsight, from what I saw from that game on Monday night, it was that Cam Newton was the one who tested positive. So the Patriots had to end up with Brian Hoyer, and it's been a long time since Brian Hoyer ever started an NFL game. He didn't play all that bad in that game against the Chiefs. It took the Chiefs a while to really get their groove going in terms of their offense and defense, but they really turned the page in the second half of that game, and they ended up beating the Pats. Obviously, the turnovers were the huge killer in that game, and a lot of it may come into play for the New England Patriots now with 2-2. Possibly it hurts them along the lines in terms of a wild card spot. So what I consider, there's still some teams that are still undefeated, like the Bills, the Packers, the Seahawks. And if I look at what what's still the best team going into week number 5, what could be the best team going into week number 5 of the NFL season, I look at it from a standpoint, I still think it is the Packers. The Packers, for the time being right now, going into week number 5, I consider they are the best team in the NFL going into this week. But I kind of I do see a point from a lot of you people. They're saying that, well, look at the opponents that the Packers have faced. And I kind of agree with some of you that, the Packers have played mediocre teams. I want to see them play the real tough teams coming up. I mean, they do have some tough games coming up soon. Really, their first toughest opponent was the Saints, and they took care of them. So it's really tough to say down the road if this Packer team can stay intact. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is on a mission. But of course, he's not the only quarterback that's on a mission. Russell Wilson is making his own statements to try to get MVP of the NFL because he hasn't gotten it yet. And the Seahawks are starting to make their case as well. Now, Seattle didn't really have their best game, even though they did win by a 10-point margin against the Dolphins. And the Seahawks do have a case to be one of the best teams in the NFL. It's going to be interesting to see if both the Packers and Seahawks do meet up in the playoffs. I'd like to see who wins that. But we won't know for sure yet down the line. I mean, those are teams I consider right now making their best case to be the best team in the NFL. The Chiefs, of course, the defending champions, they're still making their case as well. So it's tough to say right now down the line who's going to end up being the best team going into the playoffs at the end of the years, but it's hard to say right now. How about them Cowboys? Really got dismantled by the Browns. Now, I know the Cowboys almost came back and beat the Browns, but the Browns, hopefully now they've taken the next step to finally to commit themselves now as a legit contender. It's tough to say with this Browns team. I'm not ready to crown them a playoff contender just yet because down the line they do have some tough games coming up soon. And in talking about the Browns, they are going to be a team I will talk about in my 4 key game picks in a few minutes. I absolutely need to see a little bit more from this Brown team. Can this Cleveland Brown team sit together? Mayfield's playing pretty well. His offense has finally gotten to a groove, but really their defense has been a huge question. They almost let the Cowboys come back in that game, and yet the Cleveland's offense managed to save their own butts in winning that game. So it's really tough to say right now for the Dallas Cowboys, really. I mean, they're lucky, they're fortunate they're in a division that stinks, and they still have a chance to be first place even at a sub-500 record. Anyways, I could ramble on about week number 4, but let's get into week number 5. Now, looking at this week's games, a lot of these games may seem pretty predictable if you look at the current lines and odds throughout the on the internet. These games that I'm going to talk about, I probably maybe the only, maybe 2 of these games I consider key games, but the others, they're more than likely that the reason why I consider it a key game is the game might be competitive. Even though there is for some of these teams that I'm going to talk about in terms of the records, it's hard to say why I consider it a key game, but anyways, you be the judge of that. All right, let's begin with key game number 1, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Chicago Bears. The Buccaneers are a 5.5-point favorite in this one, and I sort of agree with that. Tom Brady last week over the Chargers, 30 of 46, 369 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception. I consider maybe one of his better games so far this season. Nick Foles, 26 of 42, 249 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Now, the Bears didn't play all that well against the Colts, and neither did the Colts as well. I mean, it was more of a who will not make the biggest mistake in the game sort of thing for the Bears against the Colts last week. But when it comes to Tom Brady and that offense and his experience and all that, Chicago could not be more in a rough position right now going into this week and facing a tough opponent here. Now, Tampa Bay's offense, they're finally getting in the groove and all that, and it's kind of enough for me to say that I'm going to lean towards the Bucs because the way the Tom Brady and that offense are finally getting it rolling now. The Bears, who knows if Nick Foles plays badly, will Nagy consider going back to Trubisky? Because it seems like right now the Nick Foles experience hasn't worked all that well yet. So I don't know. Obviously part of the offense is the problem, but as well as their defense is not as dominant as it was a few years ago. So no question, I like the Buccaneers in this game. I think that Tom Brady and that offense will pretty much give the Bears fits, and their defense ain't going to play all that well. I like the Buccaneers in this game here. I think the Bucs will beat the Bears here. Buccaneers over the Bears. Key game number 2, an AFC West showdown between the Raiders and the Chiefs. Now, the lines don't say that this game might be competitive because currently right now the Chiefs are 12.5-point favorite as of the time of this video. That number probably might drop. Now, the Raiders have played in these last few games have been pretty competitive. But really against the Bills last week, the Raiders really got shellacked. Obviously, the Bills did expose some of the Raiders' weaknesses, and the Raiders' defense didn't play all that well last week. They really struggled with the Bills. And speaking of struggles and all that, now Derek Carr, 32 of 44, 311 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was lucky he didn't get an interception in that game. Patrick Mahomes in a struggle with the Pats. 19 of 29, 236 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. The Raiders are going to need a miracle here in order to beat this Chiefs team, the defending champions, because this Chiefs team is no joke. Now, they didn't have their best game last week against the Pats, but when it comes to divisional opponents, I don't know how the Raiders are going to match the Chiefs offense here, and that's why you got to go with the Chiefs in this game. The Raiders had their little moment in their first 2 games, but obviously they're hitting a brick wall, and they're about to go under 500 in this game here. I like the Chiefs in this one here. The Chiefs offense is going to be too much for the Raiders to handle here. I like the Chiefs in this one. Chiefs over the Raiders. Key game number 3, the Indianapolis Colts versus the Cleveland Browns. As I mentioned before, I'm getting into the Browns a little bit here. Now, Phillip Rivers, 16 of 29, 190 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions in that somewhat victory against the Bears. The Browns, Mayfield went 19 of 30, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Now, the Colts are 2.5-point favorite in this one. Don't be surprised if that number goes down to maybe 2, maybe a point and a half. I don't know, after seeing Indy, the way they play, I mean, Indianapolis is playing sort of like a roller coaster here. I don't know. Rivers needs to play much better. That offensive line really needs to protect Rivers. And it's funny because when Rivers played for the Chargers, the problem was the offensive line on the Chargers. And he's still experiencing the same problems offensive line with the Colts. I mean, really right now, it's really the fact that Rivers really has to play much better now. His first 4 games as a Colts, he struggled a lot, but he's managed to win some of these games that the Colts have played in. For the Browns here, they just got to keep doing what they've been doing with their offense. Keep trusting your players offensively. Their defense needs to really get their act together. I expect this to be a very competitive game between both these two teams. I could see this being a very good game here. I think it's going to go back and forth in this one here. It's a tough pick, but I'm actually going to go out on the upset here. I'm going to take the Browns plus 2.5. I think to me that if the Browns can continue to play like they did with the Cowboys, I think to me they're going to give the Colts fits in this game. It will definitely be an offensive back and forth affair between these two teams, but I actually think the Browns are going to pull this off. I think to me they're going to barely beat the Colts in this game. It could go either way between these two teams, but I think with the Browns and their offense, if they continue to play like they did last week, I think to me the Browns could upset the Colts in this game here, and that's what I'm going to stick with here. I think the Browns will upset the Colts in this one here. Browns over the Colts. And finally, key game number 4, the Minnesota Vikings versus the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I know a lot of you are wondering, okay, why are you throwing this as a key game when the Vikings are not even close to contention? I know last week they barely picked up their first win against the Texans, and probably Kirk Cousins played his best game so far this season, even though stats were kind of all right. I mean, Cousins wins 16 of 22, 260 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions against a dismal Texans team that actually fired their coach this week. But it's really tough to say now, especially with for the Vikings, they're running into a brick wall here with the Seattle Seahawks here. Now Wilson, 24 of 34, 360 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Not exactly his best game, but it was good enough to beat a dismal Miami Dolphins team last week. But when it comes down to home field really doesn't mean much right now because of the pandemic with no fans in the stands. But no team, no quarterback has had so much success in their home stadium as Russell Wilson. Minnesota is going to need to pull rabbits out of the hat in order to beat the Seahawks team. This Seahawks team is a huge contender in the NFC right now, and the way they're playing right now, they're still getting their act together. And Seattle's a 7-point favorite in this one here. This is not even close. This might be a competitive game somewhat, but I just think to me the Seahawks and their offense are just too much for the Vikings here. I could easily see Seattle running away with this game, but it could be competitive. But I think the Seahawks win this game here. I'm picking the Seahawks in this one here. The Seahawks will beat the Vikings. All right, everybody, that wraps up my 4 key game picks for week number 5. For all my week 5 picks, check the description below. And I'll talk to you guys next week when I make my 4 key game picks for week number 6. And until then, take care and enjoy your football weekend.